Hey guys, it's Beethan, and today we're doing something a little bit different. We're not talking about video games, we're not talking about Dark Souls, we are talking about music. You read the title of this video, you know what it's about. So this is the top 10 best albums of 2023. Now I didn't hear every album that came out in 2023, so if your favorite doesn't make the list, don't worry about it. All right? Okay, so let's get into it. I got a couple honorable mentions before we get to the list proper. First of all, I'm gonna shout out Panopticon with their album, The Rhyme of Memory. So Panopticon, atmospheric black metal band that also uses touches of Western folk music. And this album here really leans into the atmospheric side of atmospheric black metal. So much so that you're waiting for quite a while actually before you hear anything even resembling metal music. This one also uses elements of post-rock and post-metal, and this was a style that they kind of explored on their last album with the track The Embers at Dawn. And with this album, it feels like they're taking inspiration from that song on a lot of these tracks. And these are very, very lengthy tracks too. Panopticon have always been exceeding the 10-minute mark, but they take it even further on this album with Winter's Ghost approaching the 20-minute mark. And they use this extra runtime to really build a lot of space, and the building is just very slow, and it all culminates in these really great climaxes. And that's easily the highlight of this album, is just the big, emotional, gratifying climaxes to these songs. That is the best thing about this album. So the only reason it's not on the list proper is because not all the runtime is very well spent. There's some sections I think maybe could have been trimmed here and there, but it's still a journey that I'm very glad that I took. Maybe not a journey that I'm going to be in the mood to take very often. Not all of it was super compelling, but definitely recommend this. I'm glad I listened to it, and this is one that I could definitely see growing on me with time. So next honorable mention is from George Clanton with the album Urap Aya. And this was an artist that I was unfamiliar with until very recently actually. And I don't even know what genre you would call this really. It's just some chill vibes, just some chill music. It's very synth-driven, psychedelic type stuff. And I like it. I was hooked from the very first chord, in fact. It's very, very heavenly, very ethereal, very just sit back and relax. I'd put this on whenever, for any situation. It's also pretty accessible. I'd feel comfortable recommending this to just about anyone, really. So definitely check this one out. I will say a lot of the tracks in the middle of the album don't really hit me the same as some of the tracks towards the beginning and end of the project, but still very, very solid effort. And I'll definitely be exploring this artist's work at some other time. So now the list proper. At number 10, we have Horrendous with the album Ontological Mysterium. Now, Horrendous is a modern death metal band, one of my favorite modern death metal bands, and they also have some melodic flourishes, some progressive leanings and tendencies, and this album sees them leaning even further into these tendencies to a point where a lot of the time this one doesn't even really sound like a death metal album at points. It sounds more like a progressive thrash metal album. And that's totally fine. It gives this album its own identity, and I really like that. The riffs are still great, and they're just using a little more harmony here, and that's very apparent on the opening 1-2 punch. You have the Blaze going into this 7-minute track that I don't really care to pronounce, but you definitely get these grand melodies, these grand harmonized guitars that give way to these really big riffs. It's still very technical, but you do get more melodic stuff throughout this album. There are still some death metal passages. There is a lot of heaviness, and heaviness is still really good. You know, I would maybe want to have just a few more death metal passages just because they are so good, they are so well done. And yeah, the only thing wrong with this album really is I think it's kind of short. It's only 37 minutes, and you know, a few of these tracks are just quick interludes, so maybe have like a little more meat on its bones. You know, maybe one more like 7-minute track at the end of the album would have really put it in contention for Horrendous's best album, in my opinion. But, you know, if the worst thing you can say about something is that you want more of it, well, that kind of sounds like a compliment, now doesn't it? Alright, moving on to number 9, we have After the Magic by Peripheral. Now, Peripheral is a Korean shoegaze artist. This is their second album, and this one had a lot bigger budget behind it than the first one, and it really shows, because the first one was very rough at points, very like foggy, very dreamy. There are parts of it that are hard to discern, and that roughness is actually part of the reason what made it so appealing to me in the first place. But this album does have its own unique appeal as well, because there is a lot bigger instrumentation. It sounds really full, very grand, a lot cleaner, and yeah, I love it. I love both of these albums about the same. They're both really good. This one is it's just really beautiful. It's a very beautiful album. I do appreciate the larger instrumentation. Like you still have your synths and your guitars and everything. But, you know, they also use some strings, like those violin melodies on Parade. They're so beautiful. They make me want to cry. I think I heard a trumpet in a few places. There's plenty of highlights, too. Like, I love that whacked out drum beat on Insomnia. And I love that it has one of the most jaw-dropping chord changes I've heard all year towards the end of the track. Yeah, Parade, easily a highlight. I love the bouncy melody on Sketchbook. It's just, there's not a single weak track here. I think it's pretty consistent from start to finish. Love this artist. Can't wait to see what they do next. Moving on to number 8, we have Ne Obliviscaris with the album Exel. So Ne Obliviscaris, progressive death metal band. You know, they've been at it for a while now, and they're not really doing anything too much different on this album. They're just coming out with some really, really strong material. I love the 12-minute opening track. It's just pretty much everything that this band does again, but they're doing it arguably better than they've done before. But they are doing it very well. I still think the performances across the board are excellent. The guitar work is phenomenal. The drumming is insane. The harsh vocals are visceral, the clean vocals are dramatic, and the violin still adds just that layer of drama that makes it all so compelling. The highlights on this album would be the 2 Misery chord songs. I love how the first Misery chord song ends. It's super climactic, and then the second part, you know, it sees it just building for most of its runtime, and it eventually reaches a climax that's even greater than what you find on the previous track. And they really could have made this all just one 16-minute track, but I mean, it's whatever, you know? Just really strong material from front to back. I'm really impressed with this album. I will say they maybe peaked a little too early with it. You know, maybe some of the songs on the back end don't hit as hard as the first half, but still, it's a really solid progressive death metal album from Ne Obliviscaris. You know, I'd put it up there. I wouldn't say it's better than Portal of I, but you know, maybe as good as Citadel. I don't know. Maybe that's heresy, but yeah, that's how I feel right now. Moving on to number 7, switching gears a bit, we've got Sufjan Stevens with Javelin. This is another case of an artist who's not really doing too much differently, but you know, they're doing things that they've done just very, very well. You know, those quiet folk numbers, those beautiful acoustic guitar passages, they're still here. quite a bit of variety on the track list as well. You've got these grand, like, chamber pop arrangements next to these quiet, intimate little folk ballads. And yeah, it's all great. Very consistent listen, you know, lots of great songs, and just his voice just ties it all together. I love this man's voice so much. It's so wispy, so beautiful. It's able to be so intimate. It's great. I love Sufjan Stevens. It's another great album from him. Javelin. Yeah, I love it. Next up, number 6, we've got Jeff Rosenstock with Hell Mode. So I gotta be honest, I was a little bit disappointed when I heard this the first time. I guess I was expecting something just a little more explosive, sort of like No Dream, you know? And while I still do think that No Dream is probably the best Jeff Rosenstock album, I've definitely come around to appreciate what this album does. So on this one, there's not as much doom and gloom, though that is present here on particular tracks, but this one's more about self-improvement, self-care, and just having an overall positive message, you know? And I think that's really appealing. And there's tons of variety amongst the track list. There's tons of highlights. You've got like just standard pop punk ragers. You've got some quiet ballads, you know, lots of variety. It's great. Some highlights include Liked You Better, which is just a ridiculously catchy song. You know, I love that 7-minute finale. You know, Heal Mode is such a great ballad. The Future Is Dumb, maybe one of my favorite tracks, and the ending has got to be one of the most stunning moments on any Jeff Rosenstock album. There's even a song on this album that's just called Head, and it's one of the most gloriously unhinged things I've heard all year. I can't help but love it. Jeff Rosenstock, Hell Mode, great album. It grows on me more and more and more each and every single time that I listen to it. It's fantastic. I love it. Jeff Rosenstock continues to prove that he is a genius songwriter and one of the few pop punk artists who is actually worth your time. Moving on to number 5, we're switching gears yet again. We've got Fanty Foxis with the album Hive Mind Narcosis. This is a crazy, crazy black metal album. I love it. Just from the very first song, you know, like Solar Witch, it's got to be like rhythmically and harmonically one of the most messed up songs I've heard all year. It's crazy. It just sounds so visceral, so strange, while sticking pretty true to its black metal roots. You know, they're not doing like crazy instrumentation that's like totally outside the genre. They're sticking pretty true to it, but they're just adding just a little bit of experimentation just to add a really nice flavor to it all. And I really love pretty much every track. It's weird, it's bizarre, it's visceral at points, you know, atmospheric at points when it needs to be. It's just really, really solid black metal. Probably, well, it's not the best black metal album of the year, but it might be like the best like pure or pure-ish black metal album of the year. Yeah, that closing track is just downright infernal. It's great. Yeah, I can't say enough good about it. It's really pushing the genre forward in a way that is really compelling. And I can't wait to hear what they do next. Hopefully they don't take as long with their next album as they did with this one. Moving on to number 4, we've got Periphery with Periphery 5, Gent is Not a Genre. So with this album, if you're not already a Periphery fan, then like this is not going to win you over, because they are pretty much doing what they've always done on this album. But let me tell you, this one has some of their strongest material that they've ever written, to a point where I would say this is probably my new favorite Periphery album, even though they've released so much and they haven't really evolved all that much. Their material is just so good. There's so many layers to it that I just really, really appreciate what they're doing here. So as a huge Periphery fan, this album is amazing. I'll get my one criticism out of the way. Silhouette is awful. It's one of the worst songs in their entire discography. Dying Star isn't all that great either, but let me tell you, every other song on this album bangs. Every other song is fantastic. You've got the opener, Wildfire, which just has one of the weirdest choruses I've ever heard that just grows on me every time I listen to the song. You've got Atropos, which starts out with these really sweet melodies, this sweet chorus, before giving way to these nightmarish blast beats in the second half. You've got Wax Wings, which is just so gorgeous. You've got gorgeous melodies in the first leg. In the middle of the track, you've got these arpeggios that just have this crazy harmony, just some really nutty chord changes on this track, before the finale, which is just super emotional, super grand. I love it. And then the very next song, Everything Is Fine, is also fantastic, but in a completely different way. This song is it's just disgusting. Like, it's just a vile piece of music. I love it. It's so technical, yet so just like visceral. Then towards the second half of the album, we get Dracula Gross, which is an amazing multi-phase track, before Thanks Novo, the closer, is really just the perfect way to end things. So yeah, this is my new favorite Periphery album. They keep on outdoing themselves, and I just love to hear it. I love to hear every album that they release. Great band. Great band. Moving on to number 3, we've got King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard with the album Petro Draconic Apocalypse. I'm not going to say the full title of the album because I do want to wrap this up sometime in the next century. So you'd think after releasing so many albums in such a short span of time that Gizzard would kind of start to run out of steam, start releasing less quality releases, but that is not the case at all. Because this album is one of their best. And this is coming after last year's Ice Death Planets, which is also a magnificent album for completely different reasons than this one. So this album sees King Gizzard returning to the thrash metal style that they started with Infest the Rat's Nest, and they've explored in a few other places since then. But I think this album sees them doing that style the best that they've ever done it, because the performances are so energetic. You know, I love the lead guitar. It's just face melting. The rhythm guitars sound crunchy and delicious. The riffs are great. The drumming is phenomenal, and you've got just enough vocal switch ups throughout the project to make it really interesting, and the frequent usage of odd time signatures and polyrhythms really adds a nice seasoning to the whole thing. So yeah, it was crazy, because like when Gila Monster dropped, the lead single, like I thought it was a banger, and I was like, oh, I'm so looking forward to the rest of this album. And then that track ended up being my least favorite. It's crazy how that works out, just because every song on this album is so great. It's so consistent. You know, Motor Spirit, I love like what sounds like throat singing in places in this track, and it just really has just so much energy to it. Just a perfect opener. And you've got that like synth breakdown towards the end of Flamethrower. They're really interested in creating a really unique sonic landscape with some of these tracks, because it is thrash metal. It is really intense thrash metal, but you've got just enough other things going on that really rounds it out and makes it just such a quality listen. This album is leagues better than that Metallica album that dropped this year. That album was so mid that Metallica should rename themselves to Mid-Talica. With each album that they release, you know, King Gizzard, they just climb higher and higher in my list of favorite bands ever, because they are fantastic. And yeah, even though they've released so much music, I'm still excited to hear what they do next. Fantastic album here. Moving on to number 2, we've got Liturgy with 93696. So I know not everyone likes Liturgy. You know, some people think they're pretentious. You know, want to know what I think? Yeah, I don't care. I don't care if they're pretentious or not, because the music is great. And that's really what I care about at the end of the day. Is the music good? And the music is fantastic here. This is my new favorite Liturgy album. When you listen to it, it sounds like the most important thing going on at the moment. This is an album that really, really commands your attention for most of it. I will say my one criticism, the quieter moments don't really hit me as hard as the big, heavier tracks, but the heights that they reach with this project, they're so high that I just cannot ignore this album. There's so many points listening to this where I'm like, oh yeah, this is such a great climactic way to end the song. And I look down, there's like 3 minutes left in the track. And they use that remaining time to go even higher. And it's crazy. This is one of the most gratifying black metal albums I've ever heard. And yeah, it does build upon black metal, but there's also a lot more going on here with like some orchestral elements, chorus vocals, a little bit of electronics here and there too. Like it really all comes together to make something really grandiose. And I know the word epic is kind of a cliche term to describe music, but that really is the perfect word for this. This is an epic album. Every one of the major black metal songs on this album, you've got 8, 9, 14-minute tracks. They're all great. Liturgy has this ability to make 14 minutes just go by in the blink of an eye, because it's really a 14-minute roller coaster ride. Like, not a second is wasted in these songs. They go on, they just build, and right when you think you're at the climax, they go even higher, and it's great. So, I'm in love with this album. I haven't stopped listening to it since it came out. Liturgy 93696. It's fantastic. I love it. But there was one album that I loved even more this year, and that comes from none other than HMLTD. The Worm is here at number 1. So I was unfamiliar with HMLTD prior to this year, but after hearing this record, I am so intrigued. And I did go back and hear their first album after hearing The Worm and loving it so much. There are many things that are impressive about The Worm, but one of the most impressive things is how it's able to imply so much more than its 40-minute runtime would suggest. This is a pretty short album. It's only 40 minutes. But it's able to feel so much more ambitious than their first album, despite being 10 minutes shorter, because this really feels like such a complete story, such a complete experience. This also might be one of the best paced albums I've ever heard. The track listing, it flows super well from track to track. Every track on here, it's that's the perfect place for that track. So stylistically, this album is it's a blend of progressive rock and post-punk, and it also sounds like it could be a Broadway musical. So it's not going to be a mix that's going to please everyone, but just this combination of sounds, it's unlike anything I've ever heard before. You've got Wormlands, which is essentially the opener, and it just has this nasty groove. It's just so visceral. Then you've got Days later on, which is a fantastic ballad. Liverpool Street 2, another fantastic ballad. And then you've got the title track, which is just so tense. It really feels like it's building towards a climax, and you get that with Past Life. It essentially serves as the climax of the whole album. It's such a great build that they've got, such a great progression. And then Lay Me Down is just a nice bit of ear candy to end things off. And then I would be remiss if I didn't mention Saddest Worm Ever, which is a hilarious song title, but also probably just straight up my favorite song of the year. It's just so dramatic. It's got a great build. It's catchy. And it's just everything that I want to hear. This is an album that I didn't know that I wanted, but now that I have it, I can't imagine not having it. It's fantastic. This is my favorite album of the year. I know there are some people who are going to listen to this thing. They're going to think it's cringe. They're going to think it's annoying theater kid type stuff, but I love it. I love it a lot. I'm super interested to hear where the band goes next, because yeah, this is the best album of the year for me. So that's going to do it for this video. Listen to these albums. If what I've described sounds interesting, listen to all of them. They're all great. You know, my taste in music is great. Yeah, but that's going to do it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. Take care.